I used to believe betrayal entered a marriage through a locked phone, a late reply, or a cold kiss. I never imagined it could live right next door. My husband told me he was working overtime every night, sacrificing his sleep so our family could breathe easier. And like a fool, I packed his dinner, ironed his shirts, kissed his tired face, and prayed for his strength. But while I was praying for him, he was walking across our driveway, through the small gate between our homes, and into the arms of the woman who smiled at me every morning. What I did after that was not loud. It was not violent. It was worse. Because by the time they realized I knew everything, the whole neighborhood already knew what kind of love they had destroyed. My name is Mara. I was 42 when my marriage ended inside me, though the divorce papers came much later. For 16 years, I was married to Daniel Reed. He was the kind of man people trusted easily. Tall, calm voice, clean shoes, gentle smile. At church, he helped older women carry boxes. At school meetings, he shook hands with teachers like a proud father. At home, he called me my peace. We had 2 children. Noah was 14, quiet like me, always drawing cars in the corners of his notebooks. Lily was 9, bright, dramatic, and full of questions that made adults uncomfortable. Our house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with hibiscus bushes and small front porches. In the evenings, you could hear pressure cookers whistling, radios playing soft music, children laughing, and dogs barking at bicycles. Next door lived Celeste Harper. She moved in after her divorce. 37, beautiful, polished, always smelling like jasmine and expensive lotion. She had no children, worked from home, and wore silk robes on mornings when the rest of us wore old t-shirts and tired eyes. At first, I liked her. I brought her stew the week she moved in. She cried at my kitchen table and told me her ex-husband had broken her trust. I held her hand. I told her no woman deserved to be lied to. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're lucky, Mara. Daniel seems like a good man." I smiled. I said, "He is." That sentence would come back to haunt me. Daniel's overtime started in March. At first, it was believable. He worked as an operations manager at a logistics company, and he had always been responsible. He came home late sometimes, smelling of paper, coffee, and warehouse dust. But then late became every night. He would leave after dinner, wearing the blue jacket I had bought him for our anniversary. He would kiss Lily's forehead, tap Noah's shoulder, and tell me, "Don't wait up, we're behind on shipments." I did wait up. Not because I suspected anything, but because love had trained me that way. I left the porch light on. I kept food warm. I listened for his car. Sometimes I fell asleep on the couch, waking when the door clicked open near midnight. He always looked tired. Too tired. But not the tired of a man crushed by work. It was the tired of a man carrying a secret. The first crack came on a Thursday night. Daniel came home at 11:48 p.m. I remember because the clock above the stove blinked red in the dark kitchen. I was rinsing his plate when he walked in. The first thing that reached me was not his voice, not the sound of his keys, not even the tired sigh he always gave when he wanted me to believe the night had been heavy. It was the smell. Jasmine. Soft, sweet, familiar in a way it should not have been. It did not belong to the warehouse, or to the office, or to the dusty folders he claimed to spend hours sorting through. It belonged to Celeste's porch, to her silk robes, to the expensive lotion she rubbed on her hands before touching mine across my kitchen table. My fingers tightened around the plate, and it knocked against the sink with a small, sharp sound that made Daniel look up too quickly. "What's wrong?" he asked, already cautious, already measuring my face. I turned off the faucet slowly and looked at him. "Nothing. You're late." He gave me that gentle smile he used when he wanted to calm a room. "You know how work is. We're behind again." I stepped closer, pretending to straighten the collar of his jacket, but really I wanted to be certain. The scent was stronger near his chest, trapped in the fabric I had washed with my own hands that morning. "Did someone at work start wearing perfume?" I asked, keeping my voice light enough to sound like curiosity, though my heart was beating so hard it felt like it was trying to warn me from inside my ribs. For a moment, something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, but the fear of being seen. Then he laughed. took the plate from my hands, and kissed my forehead, as if I were a child worrying over shadows. Mara, come on. Maybe from the elevator. Maybe someone hugged me goodbye. At midnight? I asked. His smile tightened, and he looked away toward the hallway. You're tired, he said. We both are. That was the first time I understood how dangerous a calm lie could be. He did not shout, did not accuse me, did not make a scene. He simply handed my doubt back to me and made it look like weakness. I went to bed that night beside him, but sleep would not come. The ceiling fan turned slowly above us, clicking with every circle, while Daniel breathed deeply at my side, like a man with nothing on his conscience. I stared into the dark and thought of Celeste's smile, her jasmine perfume, and the way she had told me I was lucky. After that night, I began noticing things I had taught myself not to notice. His phone, once left carelessly on counters and couches, now stayed face down or buried in his pocket. A new passcode appeared, and when I asked about it, he said the company had updated their security policy. He started parking farther down the street before leaving for work again at night, claiming he did not want to wake the children with the engine. Celeste, who used to knock on my door for sugar, recipes, or lonely conversation, suddenly stopped visiting whenever Daniel was home. Yet somehow, she always seemed to appear at her window within minutes of his car pulling away. One evening, while I was folding towels warm from the dryer, Lily sat on the floor, lining up her dolls, and asked, with the innocent cruelty only children have, "Mum, why does Dad park down the street now when he goes back to work?" My hands paused around a towel. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She shrugged, still arranging the dolls by size. "Sometimes he drives away, but then I see his car near Mrs. Celeste's fence." Noah, who was at the table doing homework, looked up sharply. "Lily, stop." "What?" she said, frowning at him. "I saw it." Daniel walked in before I could answer, and the room changed. Noah bent over his notebook as if the page had suddenly become important. Lily went quiet, and I forced myself to keep folding. Daniel kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner, and acted as though he had not stepped into a silence his own lies had created. That night, when he left again after dinner, wearing the blue jacket I had bought him for our anniversary, I stood at the bedroom window with the curtain pulled just enough to see the street. He drove past our house, turned the corner, and disappeared the way he always did. 10 minutes later, a shadow moved near Celeste's side gate, just behind the old mango tree that leaned over both our fences. I knew that walk. I knew the set of those shoulders. I knew the shape of that jacket in moonlight. My knees went weak, but I did not scream, run outside, or call his name. I only stood there, gripping the curtain until my fingers hurt, while something inside me whispered that if I broke too soon, I would never learn the whole truth. So I watched. For 3 weeks, I watched my marriage become a pattern. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Daniel left after dinner, parked 2 streets away, and walked through Celeste's backyard gate. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he claimed inventory meetings and came home with that same sweet smell clinging to his clothes, mixed sometimes with wine or vanilla candles. On Saturdays, Celeste would stand by the fence while I hung laundry and say things like, "Mara, you look exhausted. You should make Daniel help you more." And I would smile with wet sheets in my hands, feeling the weight of every word she dared to say to me. At first, the pain made me quiet. Then the quiet made me observant. I stopped asking Daniel where he had been, and because he mistook my silence for trust, he became careless. That is the thing about people who lie for too long. They start believing their own performance. They think because you are still cooking, still washing, still answering gently, you must still be blind. But I was not blind anymore. I was only gathering the strength to look directly at what was happening. The first real proof came by accident. Daniel had left his old tablet in the garage, the one he used years before for work emails, and never bothered to reset. I was looking for batteries for Lily's toy microphone when the screen lit up on the workbench. A message notification appeared, and I saw Celeste's name before I could even prepare myself. Last night was worth the risk. My body went cold. I stood there for a long time, staring at those 6 words while the garage smelled of motor oil, old paint, and rain-damp cardboard. I knew opening the tablet would change something in me forever. But betrayal does not deserve privacy after it has stolen your peace. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, but I opened the messages anyway. They went back months, not weeks, not a foolish mistake, not one night that became a regret. Months. There were jokes, photos, little complaints about me, plans made around my routines, and conversations about when Daniel would leave. Celeste asked him if he still loved me. Daniel wrote that he loved the children and respected me, but that with her, he felt alive. Then came the message that made me slide down onto the cold garage floor and cover my mouth so I would not make a sound the children could hear. Mara has no idea. She trusts me too much. Sometimes I feel bad watching her pack my food before I come to you. I read that sentence again and again, as if my mind needed to suffer through it more than once before accepting that the man I loved had not only betrayed me, but had laughed gently from inside the shelter of my loyalty. I thought of all the nights I wrapped his dinner in foil, added extra sauce because he liked it that way, and whispered a prayer over him before he left. I had been feeding his lie with my own hands. For 2 days, I moved through the house like a woman underwater. I made breakfast, signed school papers, washed uniforms, and kissed my children goodnight. Daniel noticed my silence and tried to touch me more than usual, as if affection could cover the smell of rot. One evening, while the children ate spaghetti at the table, he reached for my hand and said, "You've been quiet lately. Are you okay?" I looked at his fingers wrapped around mine. Warm, familiar, cruel. "Just tired," I said. He squeezed my hand. "I'm doing all this for us, Mara. For us." The words sat between us like something dead. That night, while he went to Celeste again, I made copies of everything. Messages, hotel receipts, bank transfers, photos reflected in Celeste's living room mirror where Daniel's wedding ring caught the light like an insult. I saved them in 3 places, emailed them to an account he did not know about, and printed the most important ones at the small shop near the pharmacy. The young man behind the counter barely looked at me, but I felt exposed anyway, as if the whole world could see the shame I was carrying in a folder. Then I found the money. That wound was different. Deeper, maybe, because it reached beyond me and touched our children. Daniel had been using our emergency savings for dinners, gifts, hotel rooms, and one weekend trip he had called a work conference. I remembered that weekend clearly, because Lily had been sick with fever, and I had stayed awake, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, while Daniel sent short messages saying the meetings were exhausting. I stared at the bank statements until the numbers blurred, realizing that the money meant for Noah's braces, Lily's school fees, and the roof repair before rainy season had been spent on another woman's wine, perfume, and bracelets. That night I lay beside him and did not sleep. Daniel snored softly, one arm thrown over his head, peaceful as a man who believed he had hidden the knife after using it. The ceiling fan clicked above us, and moonlight touched the small scar on his chin, the one he got years ago fixing Noah's bicycle. I had loved that scar once. I had pressed ice to it while he laughed and said, "This family will be the death of me." Now I looked at him and thought, "No, Daniel, your lies will be." The next morning I made pancakes. Daniel loved pancakes. So did the children. I placed his plate in front of him with syrup on the side and smiled when he thanked me. Relief passed over his face, quick and obvious. He thought my quiet meant the storm had passed. He thought the woman pouring coffee in an old robe was the same woman who used to believe every tired smile he brought home. Men like Daniel often mistake silence for weakness, and Celeste made the same mistake when she waved at me over the fence later that morning, wearing the bracelet paid for with my children's savings. The opportunity came through something simple: our street's annual charity dinner. Every year, the neighbourhood held a Saturday evening fundraiser for the community school. There were tables in the garden behind the community hall, music from an old speaker, grilled chicken, rice, cakes, speeches, donation boxes, and children running between adults dressed nicer than usual. Celeste volunteered to organise decorations. Daniel volunteered to manage donations. Of course he did. The two of them had become very good at standing in public as respectable people while hiding private corruption under polished smiles. I volunteered too, for the video presentation. Nobody expected that from me. I was known as the quiet helper, the woman who cooked, cleaned, brought extra napkins, and stayed until the last chair was stacked. Celeste laughed softly when I offered. "Oh, Mara, that's sweet. Do you know how to make a slideshow?" "I'm learning," I said. Daniel chuckled beside her. "My wife is full of surprises lately." I looked at him and smiled. "You have no idea." For the next 10 days, I became the calmest woman on our street. I went to a lawyer named Ruth Menser, a quiet woman with silver glasses, neat braids, and eyes that had seen every version of heartbreak. Her office smelled of paper, black coffee, and lemon polish. She reviewed the documents while I sat across from her with my handbag clutched in my lap, feeling like a child waiting to be punished for telling the truth. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked at me carefully. "You have enough for divorce proceedings, and the financial misuse will matter." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Then she asked, "What do you want, Mara?" No one had asked me that in years. People asked what dinner would be, where the school forms were, whether Daniel's shirts were ready, whether the children had eaten. But what did I want? The question opened something in me so suddenly that I almost cried. "I want my children safe," I said. "I want the money back. And I want them to stop looking at me like I'm stupid." Ruth leaned back with a softness that did not weaken her authority. "Then do not act from anger. Act from clarity." So I did. I opened a separate bank account, gathered school records, copied statements, documented withdrawals, and requested confirmation of Daniel's overtime hours from his company under the excuse of preparing a surprise appreciation speech. Their reply came the next morning, polite and devastating. Daniel had not worked approved overtime in 7 months. Not one night. I printed the email and held it in my hands like a death certificate for the last version of my marriage. Then I prepared the slideshow. Not the kind of revenge people imagine, with screaming, broken glass or clothes thrown into the street. Mine would be quieter, cleaner, truthful. The kind of truth that arrives dressed politely, sits at the table, and waits until everyone is listening. The charity dinner took place on a warm Saturday evening. The garden behind the community hall glowed with string lights, and the air smelled of grilled chicken, fresh bread, cut grass, and Celeste's jasmine perfume. Everyone was there. Neighbours, teachers, church friends, Daniel's supervisor, Celeste's book club, even her ex-husband Marcus, who still helped with community events, though their marriage had ended years before. Daniel wore a white shirt and moved around the donation table with his usual charm, shaking hands and laughing in that calm, trustworthy way that had fooled so many people, including me. Celeste wore a green dress that made her look elegant, untouchable, almost royal, until she hugged me, and I smelled the same perfume that had haunted my kitchen. "You look beautiful, Mara," she said. "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." During dinner, Daniel sat beside me and touched my knee under the table. Once that touch would have comforted me. That night, it felt like a thief placing his hand on the door of a house he had already robbed. I moved my leg away gently, and he looked at me with a question in his eyes. But before he could speak, the coordinator tapped the microphone and announced that I had prepared a short presentation about the families who made our community strong. People clapped as I walked to the front. For 1 second, fear closed around my throat. I saw Noah and Lily at the children's table. Noah watched me carefully, already old enough to sense that something was not ordinary. Lily smiled proudly and waved with both hands. I almost stopped. Then I looked at Daniel and Celeste. She leaned toward him and whispered something, and they both laughed softly. That laugh gave me back my strength. The first slides were harmless. Photos of schoolchildren, parents painting classroom walls, neighbours cooking, volunteers setting up chairs, old women smiling beside donation boxes. People nodded, smiled, and clapped in the warm way people do when they recognise themselves as good. Then the screen went black, and white words appeared. Sometimes the people who speak most about sacrifice are sacrificing someone else. The garden changed. It was still full of people, still lit by golden lights, still smelling of food and flowers, but the air tightened. Daniel sat up straight. Celeste's smile disappeared. I clicked again, and the email from Daniel's company filled the screen, confirming he had not worked overtime in 7 months. A murmur moved through the crowd. Daniel stood quickly. Mara. I turned to him, holding the microphone with both hands. Sit down, Daniel. My voice was calm. That frightened him more than shouting would have. The next slides came one after another. Bank withdrawals, dates, amounts, hotel charges, restaurant receipts. The bracelet purchased from our emergency account, followed by a photo of Celeste wearing that same bracelet at a church picnic, with her arm around my shoulders. Someone gasped. Celeste whispered, "Oh my God," as though the betrayal had happened to her. I clicked again, and Daniel's message appeared on the screen. Mara has no idea. She trusts me too much. Sometimes I feel bad watching her pack my food before I come to you. I did not show anything indecent. I did not need to. The betrayal was already naked enough. Daniel moved toward me, but Marcus stepped in front of him. Let her speak, he said, his voice low and firm. Daniel looked around, and for the first time since I had known him, he seemed smaller than the image he carried. Sweat darkened the collar of his white shirt. His eyes jumped from face to face, searching for sympathy and finding only recognition. Mara, he said, this isn't the place. You made it the place, I replied. You used work, charity events, school nights, and community meetings to hide what you were doing. You made it the place when you let our children believe their father was working for them while he was stealing from them. The silence after that felt heavy enough to bend the lights. Celeste stood, crying now, but not with the kind of tears that wash a soul clean. These were the tears of exposure. Mara, please, she said. We didn't mean to hurt you. I looked at her, and for a moment I remembered the woman who had sat at my kitchen table, telling me her husband had broken her trust. You let me comfort you for the same wound you were giving me, I said. Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth. Daniel tried again. I can explain. No, I said. You already explained everything in your messages. The final slide was not a receipt, a message, or a bank statement. It was a family photo from 5 years earlier, taken under the mango tree. Daniel holding Lily, Noah leaning against me, all of us smiling like people who believed happiness was solid. Beneath it, I had written, "This is what lies cost." For a moment, no one moved. Then I placed the microphone down. My hands were trembling now, but my voice had not broken. I walked past Daniel, and when he reached for my arm, I stepped back before his fingers could touch me. Don't touch me, I said. Those 3 words ended 16 years. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that you ignored your own instincts, then you understand why I did not cry at first. Sometimes the tears come later, when the body finally believes what the heart already knows. Stay with me, because what happened after that night taught me that betrayal does not only reveal who they are. It reveals who you become when you stop begging to be respected. The fallout began before the chairs were even folded. By Monday morning, Daniel's company had opened an internal review because his supervisor had seen the proof himself, and Daniel had used the company's name as cover for months of lies. Celeste stopped opening her curtains. The woman who once drifted across her porch in silk and jasmine now kept her house dark, as if darkness could hide what everyone already knew. But I did not feel victorious. Not really. Victory is not the moment they fall. Victory is the moment you stop falling with them. Daniel came home Sunday afternoon with red eyes and a voice that sounded scraped raw. The children were at my sister's house because I had planned that carefully. They did not need to watch their father beg. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom while I folded his clothes into 2 suitcases, each shirt landing with a soft finality that made the room feel colder. Mara, please don't do this, he said. I kept folding. Do what? Destroy our family. I stopped then, holding one of his shirts in my hands, and looked at the man who had mistaken consequences for cruelty. Our family was already destroyed, Daniel. I'm just opening the windows so the smell can leave. He sat on the bed and covered his face. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting milk, I said. A mistake is missing a turn. You made a schedule. He cried after that, and I had seen Daniel cry only twice before, when his mother died, and when Lily survived 3 terrifying nights in the hospital after being born too early. But this crying was different. It was frightened and selfish, the grief of a man who had lost his image before he had understood the wound. He said he loved me. I told him no, he loved being loved by me. He said I had planned everything. I told him he had planned it, and I had survived it. He left that evening with 2 suitcases and no dignity. The house felt strange afterward, not peaceful, not immediately, but hollow in a way that almost echoed. It was like a storm had torn off the roof, and only then could we see the sky. Noah came home quieter than before, and I knew he understood more than I wanted him to. At 14, children hear the truth inside the pauses adults leave behind. He found me washing dishes that night and stood beside me for a long time before asking, "Mom, did Dad cheat?" The plate in my hand felt heavy. I turned off the water and faced him, because he deserved a truth that did not insult his intelligence. "Yes." "With Mrs. Celeste?" I closed my eyes for half a second. "Yes." His jaw tightened, and tears filled his eyes in a way that made him look younger than 14. I hate him. I pulled him into my arms, and he resisted for only a moment before collapsing against me. "Don't let his wrong become poison in you," I whispered. "He lied to us," Noah said, his voice breaking. "He lied to me." "I know," I said, holding him tighter. "I know." That hurt more than the affair itself. Daniel had not only betrayed me, he had taught his son that a father's word could turn into smoke. Lily, being younger, asked different questions. She wanted to know if Daddy was coming home for dinner, then if he was sleeping somewhere else, then, after a few nights of watching my face too closely, whether he had hurt my feelings. I knelt in front of her and told her yes. She touched my cheek with her small hand and asked, "Can feelings heal?" That was when I cried, quietly but honestly, and told her they could, if they were cared for gently. She hugged me and whispered, "I'll be careful with yours." That sentence became one of the reasons I chose healing over bitterness. The legal process was not clean, because endings rarely are. Daniel tried to say I had humiliated him publicly, but Ruth answered that truth was not humiliation, conduct was. He tried to minimize the money, but the bank statements were stronger than his excuses. He tried to argue that the children should not be influenced by my anger, but when asked why he had disappeared night after night under false claims of work, his silence did more damage than anything I could have said. Celeste sent me a letter 3 weeks after the dinner. It came in a cream-coloured envelope that smelled faintly of jasmine, and for a moment I hated the way my body reacted before my mind could calm it. She wrote that she was lonely, that Daniel had made her feel seen, that she had never meant for it to go so far. I read it twice at the kitchen table, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. Some apologies are not bridges. They are umbrellas offered after the flood. A month later, I saw her at the grocery store. The fluorescent lights made everyone look tired, but Celeste looked smaller than I remembered, without lipstick, without silk, without the softness of performance. She froze near the rice aisle when she saw me, one hand resting on the cart handle as if she needed it to stay standing. For a moment, I did not see only the woman who had betrayed me. I saw a broken person who had chosen to break someone else instead of healing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked at her for a long time. "I believe you're sorry it ended this way," I said. "But I don't believe you were sorry while it was hurting me quietly." She nodded because there was no defense for the truth. Months passed and the street changed. People stopped whispering when I walked by, or maybe I stopped caring enough to hear them. Celeste sold her house before Christmas and moved away. Daniel rented a small apartment across town, and the divorce was finalised in January. I kept the house. He had to repay the money he had taken from our savings, and he lost the promotion he had been expecting. Later, he left the company entirely. Some people said I ruined him, but I knew the truth. I did not ruin Daniel. I only stopped protecting the lie that made him look whole. He tried to come back once. It was raining hard that night, the kind of rain that beats against windows and turns the yard into mud. I opened the door and found him standing there, soaked, without an umbrella, his hair flattened to his forehead. He looked older, Not because of time, but because consequences age people faster than years. "Mara," he said, "I miss my family." "The children are your family," I told him. "You can rebuild with them slowly." "I miss you." Those words entered me, but they did not own me anymore. Once I would have opened the door wider, made tea, handed him a towel, and mistaken his sadness for love. But I had learned the difference between a man who missed me and a man who missed the comfort of being forgiven. "I missed you too," I said, "for months, while you were lying beside me." He looked down at the wet porch. "I don't know who I am without you." "That is your work now," he cried then, and this time I felt sadness instead of anger. Not love, not hatred, just sadness for the life we had almost had. I had once imagined growing old with him, sharing medicine bottles on the nightstand, spoiling grandchildren, laughing about grey hair. Now he was only a stranger, wearing my memories. "I can change," he said. "I hope you do," I replied. His eyes lifted with hope, so I added, "For yourself, and for the children. Not for me." Then I closed the door. My hands shook afterward. Healing is not a straight road. Some nights I missed his laugh. Some mornings I hated him again. Some afternoons I found one of his old shirts in the laundry room and sat on the floor, remembering the man he had been before the lies swallowed him. But slowly, the house learned new sounds. Noah's pencil scratching paper at the kitchen table. Lily singing off-key in the bathroom. My own laughter returning, strange at first, then familiar. I started working part-time at a local catering business, first because I needed extra money, then because I needed something that belonged only to me. I had always cooked for my family, but now people began paying for the same hands Daniel had taken for granted. I baked cakes on weekends, then birthday orders came, then wedding orders, then church events. The first wedding cake I made after the divorce nearly broke me. White frosting, fresh flowers, 2 gold rings placed carefully on top. I stood in my kitchen at midnight, piping delicate borders, and suddenly I had to sit down. Love had not failed, I realised. Daniel had. That difference saved me. If love itself had been the enemy, I might have become bitter forever. But love was not the knife. Love was the table I had built, the place where our children ate, laughed, and grew. Daniel had simply chosen to cut on it. One afternoon, Noah came home and placed a drawing in front of me. It was our house, but brighter than he usually drew it. The porch light was on, Lily was in the yard, and I was standing by the door. Daniel was not in the picture. I looked at it carefully and asked, "Is this how home feels now?" Noah shrugged, embarrassed. "It feels calmer." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's good." He sat across from me, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the paper. "Do you think I'll become like him?" The question hurt because I knew fear had been growing inside him quietly. I reached for his hand and held it firmly. Being his son is not the same as becoming his choices. What if I lie someday? Then tell the truth quickly, I said. Repair what you can, and never make someone feel crazy for noticing your dishonesty. That became the lesson I repeated in our home. Not that all men lie, not that love is dangerous, not that trust is foolish. The lesson was simpler and stronger. Trust others, yes, but trust yourself too. A year later, the community school held the charity dinner again. I almost did not go. Too many memories lived in that garden, under those string lights, near the same microphone where my old life had cracked open in front of everyone. But Lily's class was singing, and Noah said he did not care whether we went, which meant he cared deeply. So I went. The garden looked the same, but I did not. I wore a simple blue dress, pinned my hair back, and left my hands bare. No wedding ring. No shame. People greeted me warmly now, not with pity, but with respect. During the event, the coordinator asked me to say a few words because my catering business had donated desserts. I walked to the microphone, and for a moment, I remembered the woman who had stood there with trembling hands and proof of betrayal glowing behind her. This time, there was no slideshow. Only me. Last year, I said, looking out at the faces under the lights, I stood here during one of the hardest moments of my life. I thought I was losing everything. But sometimes what leaves your life was only blocking the door. The garden grew quiet, but it was a gentle quiet. I learned that dignity can survive embarrassment. I learned that children need truth more than perfect pictures. And I learned that a broken home is not always the one where someone leaves. Sometimes it is the one where everyone stays and keeps pretending. My voice shook, then steadied. So tonight, I'm grateful for community, for healing, and for every person who chooses honesty before the damage becomes permanent. People clapped, softly at first, then warmly. Lily ran into my arms. Noah stood beside me, trying not to smile, which made me smile even more. Across the garden, near the back gate, I saw Daniel. He had come for the children's performance. He looked older, thinner, quieter. Our eyes met, and for once, he did not try to approach me. He only nodded, not asking for anything, not performing remorse, just acknowledging what had been lost. I nodded back. That was the closest thing to peace we could share. After the climax of my life, I learned something I wish someone had told me earlier. Revenge does not have to make you cruel. Sometimes the strongest revenge is refusing to protect the lie that destroyed you. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments, because I read your stories, and sometimes your courage helps someone else recognize their own. Years have passed now. Daniel is more present with the children than he was before, though the road has not been easy. Noah forgave him slowly, in pieces so small they were almost invisible. Lily forgave faster, because children often do, especially when their hearts still believe people can become better. As for me, I forgave differently. I did not invite Daniel back. I did not pretend Celeste was harmless. I forgave by refusing to carry them into every room of my future. Forgiveness, for me, became release, not permission. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing them that night. I've thought about that question many times. I regret that my children had to live through the consequences of their father's choices. I regret trusting Celeste with my kindness. I regret every night I doubted my own senses because someone else lied with confidence, but I do not regret the truth. The truth saved me. It hurt first, yes. It burned through my life like fire through dry grass. But after the fire, I could finally see what had been hiding in the dark. Now, when I turn off the lights at night, I no longer wait for a car in the driveway. I no longer listen for footsteps filled with secrets. I no longer smell jasmine and feel my stomach twist. I sleep deeply, freely, in a house where no one has to pretend. And sometimes, just before sleep, I think about the woman I was back then, folding laundry while betrayal happened next door, packing food for a man who laughed at her trust, standing behind curtains while her life broke silently. I wish I could hold her. I wish I could tell her that she was not foolish for loving. They were foolish for thinking love made her blind. Because love did not make me blind. Love made me patient. But truth made me powerful. And if this story reaches someone sitting in a quiet house tonight, wondering why the person they love suddenly feels like a stranger, I hope you remember this. Your heart often hears the truth before your ears do. Do not ignore it forever. A faithful woman can cry, break, forgive, and rebuild. But when she finally stands up, even her silence becomes thunder. So tell me, if the person you trusted most betrayed you with someone close enough to wave at you every morning, would you expose the truth? Or would you walk away quietly?